Well, good morning, everyone. We're so glad that you are with us this morning for adult formation on this second Sunday in our series called Discerning God's Call to Us in Community. Today, we have the great joy of having Dr. Luther Smith with us today. Not only is he just such a deep, deep soul, he's becoming a dear friend of mine. I think I can say that. But he's also the professor emeritus of church and community at Candler School of Theology, which is right up the street from us. The title of his teaching position, you may have read in his bio this week, reflects his commitment to social transformation as an expression of religious conviction. And today he's going to be talking to us a bit about how this is oriented in the life, spirituality, and thought of Howard Thurman. We're so glad that he is here with us. He shared with me as we were preparing for this session that he also has met for many years in our building with the Interfaith Children's Movement that educates, mobilizes networks of faith and being advocates for children in Georgia. And so I'm just so glad that he was able to join us today. And we welcome you, Dr. Smith.
Thank you, Reverend Lambalay. It's an honor to be invited. I've certainly enjoyed our times of discussion in preparing for this time of togetherness. And again, I'm very appreciative for the church in hosting the Interfaith Children's Movement for its events, as well as the other times I've been there, which have been an indication of your witness to hospitality for many others who are involved in matters of social transformation, working on behalf of beloved community. So I'm deeply, deeply appreciative. I can even say feeling a deep indebtedness to Epiphany. So thank you for all of that. I want to begin by just restating what I understood to be the invitation. In light of your series, Reverend Lambalay wrote, "We are inviting our members to discern how the interplay between the story of self, the story of us, and the story of now are all part of this time, this Lenten season." And I identified as the title for our time together, Howard Thurman, Religious Experience and Social Transformation. There's so much I could easily say about Howard Thurman. Just doing something of a biographical sketch would use all of our time. I'm not going to do that. I would just say that for those who perhaps are not acquainted, Howard Thurman was born in 1899. He died in 1981, and between those dates is an incredible life. Just a very few of the highlights being his being one of the first African Americans to meet with Gandhi. This was with his wife and another companion on the journey, and the three of them were actually the first African Americans to meet with Gandhi. And from that, Thurman had an understanding of how Gandhi's philosophy could be transformative in the United States, and came back with this message. So many had felt that Thurman was the one who brought this understanding of nonviolence as a means for transformation to the modern civil rights movement. Thurman was understood to be a mentor of Martin Luther King Jr. There's a paper in which King identifies Thurman in his mind at the time as one of the 10 most outstanding persons of the 20th century. So this gives you some idea of their connection. He established one of the first interracial, intercultural churches in American life in both membership and leadership in San Francisco. And that church had something of an international reputation for crossing the boundaries in ways in which people were not experiencing in their Christian churches. And he was the dean of the chapel at Boston University. Let me suggest that you review the documentary. There's a PBS documentary about Howard Thurman's life to get more of the details and I think a flavor of that life. It's entitled Backs Against the Wall, the Howard Thurman story. And you can just go online to the PBS website and click a link and download it for free. I think it's worthy of your time. It in itself is not only an introduction to Thurman, but I think an introduction to the kinds of themes we're exploring today. So the significance of religious experience to our journey, especially a journey where we take seriously God's call upon us to be transforming community and working toward the formation of community that is God's dream for us. Howard Thurman's religious experience is that of mysticism. I wrote a book on Howard Thurman entitled The Mystic as Prophet, and spoke of Thurman as having an understanding of his own religious life as prophetic mysticism. There are, of course, different types of mysticism. And mysticism is not just a Christian tradition, but it is also one that is deeply expressed within the Christian tradition. So today I'd like to focus on Thurman's process of moving from personal religious experience to activism on behalf of community. And by personal religious experience, we're not just limiting that to mysticism. Mysticism is a form of religious experience, but it's not the only expression of religious experience. And there are questions which arise from this for us. One being, what image of Jesus are we willing to follow? What image of Jesus are we willing to follow? Is it possible that the more we understand about the ministry of Jesus, we experience a discomfort as we consciously or subconsciously wrestle with the question, is Jesus too radical for us? After this presentation, there will be time for comments and questions. That is my intent, because such an interaction, I think, helps toward issues of clarification as well as expansion. There are different types of religious experience. I just want to name three of them. One being what is often understood to be introverted religious experience. That being persons who primarily come to religious knowledge, religious understanding, by way of meditation, by way of profound reflection that brings forth insights that lead them into a sense of who they are and what God desires of them, what God desires beyond themselves. A second form is extroverted, and this is where people are primarily engaging realities outside of themselves. It may begin with nature, which was actually Thurman's, I think, first mystic expression. He was something of a nature mystic as a child growing up in Florida, where he speaks about fishing on the Halifax River and walking the beach of the Atlantic Ocean, and how all of that just led him to a different awareness, a different God consciousness, a different sense of his self, as well as that which enfolded him. And so there are those who look to that which is external to themselves as the means by which they come to a religious understanding. And third, ambivertive mysticism. Those who really take in both the internal and the extrovertive approach by way of coming to religious knowledge, religious understanding. And I think that characterizes Howard Thurman, both the internal and the external. Mystics also are of not one category. There are very many different types of mystics. There are those who experience images, sounds, feelings of touch, very sensually oriented mystics in terms of their understanding of an experience of God, a direct and immediate experience of God. This can be affirmed, and this can be a matter for great suspicion, because we can often find ourselves having central experiences that do not necessarily result in a single conclusion that perhaps honors what God is trying to communicate to us. What is so vital with any experience is what you bring to it by way of interpretation. And a classic example of that is the experience of St. Francis, who, when having this very vivid experience of Christ crucified and speaking to him, saying, "Go build my house. As you see, it is all being destroyed." Francis went away from that experience thinking God was calling him to do actual physical repair on churches. And it took some time for him to realize that this was really not the intent of this message. It was to rebuild people, the people of the church, and to recognize that the life of the church itself was in such disrepair that a new spirit of renewal needed to be brought. And this is the challenge for any kind of religious experience, not just the experience itself, which can be called into question, but even when the experience is not called into question, what kind of interpretation do we have about that experience? There are mystics who describe their experience of God as a sense of union, where all distinctions of reality disappear. And there are mystics who describe their experience of God as communion, where the distinctions do not disappear, but there's a oneness about them that reflects the wholeness that God seeks for us all to be aware of. There are mystics who really put their focus on the experience as one of love, as being the most important outcome, this feeling of being loved, and this feeling that all of reality can be characterized by love. This is very much associated with Thurman's perspective in terms of his own mystical experiences, as well as what I previously said about communion rather than a union, where particularity is not lost to the sense of also being part of something that is whole. And then there are the mystics who even believe that pursuing the experience of love is a false way to be engaged in religious experience, that the experience of God alone is sufficient, not just to go for the experience of love. So you have a great deal of diversity. And whenever we hear the word mystic and mysticism, I know there are persons who have their own understanding of that as if it means one thing, but mysticism is much more complex than that. So at this point, I'm going to share my screen to talk about Thurman's distinctive process of mystical experience and what it provides for us. Here is one of my favorite images of Thurman, especially since he's in his smiling mode. He had a wonderful, wonderful, engaging smile. And there are many pictures, however, of him that show him more of a reflective mood that I think many people gravitate toward when they think of what someone of profound religious experience looks like in a state of meditation. Howard Thurman's understanding of the process of religious experience, a true sense of self and compassion for community. It begins for Thurman in the religious experience. And as I've described, for him, it's mystical experience, but Thurman is making no claim that only mystical experience carries us along this process. But for him, that's how he names it. And Thurman believes this is also Jesus's understanding of his experience, that an experience of a direct and immediate experience of God. This is not an understanding of God simply by way of tradition, or an understanding of God by way of that coming through the scriptures. Yes, tradition and scriptures inform us and therefore inform the experience at some level properly, but also this direct and immediate experience of God, awareness of God, sense of God, is what Thurman believes also characterizes the experience of Jesus. And here, for Thurman, there is this emphasis on what it means to be encountered by God, aware of God, in the presence of God, in a personal and private way, a way which affirms one's ultimate worth as a child of God. And this is really vital to Thurman, the sense in which there is the significance of me. And that significance must be affirmed throughout my whole life. This significance of who I am. Thurman has written, how can I believe that life has meaning if I do not believe that my own life has meaning? And I think it's a universal statement. And there's a distinctive racial dimension to this for Thurman that comes through his grandmother, who was born into slavery. And Thurman recounts those examples of her gathering him and his sisters around her when she could feel that the water in their well was low. And to uplift them, she would tell them about her experience in slavery. She didn't talk about that much, but this she did speak to. And she said there would be that time when a preacher who was a slave would come around and talk about slaves, be faithful to your masters. And they remembered that, but it really did not move them like the slave preacher who would come to them and end the message by saying, you are not slaves. You are not niggers. You are God's children. And Thurman said whenever she would come to that ending, there would be this aura about her and a straightening of her spine, which would be a straightening of their spines. This sense in which your true identity is known to you is vital to Thurman as part of the life journey. And this is one of those realities that emerge for Thurman out of the religious experience itself. Secondly, the experience provides, let me get this. The experience provides the confidence of ultimate security. As Thurman states, the human spirit is exposed to the kind of experience that is capable of providing an ultimate clue to all levels of reality, to all dimensions of time, and to all aspects of faith and the manifestations therein. A sense of ultimate security. It is an experience about me, but it's not just an experience about me. It's that which gives me a sense beyond myself in a way that conveys to me, assures me that who I am and what is happening is part of something ultimate, something sacred, something all-encompassing. And this can, as Thurman has said in his own life, sustain one regardless of what the assault on life might be. And third, the experience of God gives life a new focus, a new sense of commitment. The subject realizes that only a life fully surrendered to God can experience meaning, security, and hope. God becomes the absolute to which life is given. Conversion would be another word that could be understood to be here. It's not just this experience of God and then I walk away and life continues as it was, but this must mean something in my own transformation, who I am, what I do, my outlook on life, and how my life is lived out of that perspective and not just in some way dismissive of that perspective as, another day. That this is a life-changing experience. And it's not as if the experience in and of itself takes care of everything. No, there's work to be done. But what is clear is that we cannot diminish the experience by going forward as if, for some reason, our lives must not be always in connection with what has happened to us and seeking to honor what has happened to us. Fourth, the new life commitment, conversion, changes the character and habits of a person. Emotionally, spiritually, and physically, the individual experiences more power to respond to the demands of life. The release of this power gives the individual an awareness of her potential for fulfillment, for love. And the urge to be godlike, perfect, transforms the personality to expressing fuller meanings of life. Again, the difference that it makes, and not just difference, but a difference with a particular orientation that resonates with God's dream for us and our fulfillment. Fifth, in expressing the fuller meanings of love, one seeks to change the social order. And to quote Thurman, in his effort to achieve the good, he, the mystic, finds that he must be responsive to human need by which he is surrounded, particularly the kind of human need in which the sufferers are victims of circumstances over which as individuals they have no control. Circumstances that are not responsive to the exercise of an individual will, however good and however perfect. To truly understand the experience of God as love for oneself, and that which is throughout the sense of wholeness in the experience. That wholeness includes community, my neighbors, and with particular attention, as Thurman says, to the reality of suffering and the meaning of how my awareness of that reality and what love means for me requires me to be attentive to that reality of suffering. And of course, this is part of our tradition in scriptures where issues of suffering, care for those who are in some of the most impoverished conditions, those who are in prison, those who are strangers, those who are without the basic necessities are attended to, as well as those who are suffering injustice. And finally, the transformation of the self and the social order discloses community, which can also be understood as wholeness or salvation. A life which responds to the vision of God will establish the kind of relationships where God is experienced more and more, and where the underlying unity of reality becomes the immediate environment in which society finds itself. That I seek to make the reality in which I am living and in which others are living resonant with a kind of love, caring love, not just theoretical love, caring love, not just remote love, but caring love that is crucial to make a difference in the lives of persons. So, this is what Thurman, as I said, believes had shaped the life and ministry of Jesus. And it leads Thurman to read how this kind of experience led Jesus in this deep commitment to be transformative in his world. And I want to read just this section from one of Thurman's sermons. It's a sermon on commitment, where he has, as his scripture, Luke 14:26-35. And he says, "And do you wonder why we have a so-called Christian civilization that doesn't bother with Jesus?" Christian civilization that doesn't bother with Jesus. He's the most dangerous figure on the horizon of mortal man. And if we seek to reproduce in ourselves the religion which he experienced, we shall destroy our civilization, and there shall not be one stone left on the other. So what do? We pray to him instead. That's easier. We just walk by, as they do once a year in the Soviet Union, I'm told, on Lenin's birthday, pass before his bier and pay tribute, because this is a dangerous man. This gives you, I think, a sense of Thurman's convictions about Jesus and the character of Jesus, and what that means for us as those who claim to follow Jesus. So, Jesus as a radical. And I want to explain this term, radical, because so often it's used to basically describe what folks would consider to be an extremist willing to overthrow everything, but that's only one understanding of the term radical. Radical, at its most fundamental level, refers to the root of something, And yes, it can be used to describe someone who's pulling things up by the roots, the accepted standards by their roots, and they are then seen as destroyers of the status quo. But another meaning of radical is getting back to the roots. And here the efforts is to make the society see how it has veered from the fundamental principles and behaviors that nourish its identities of excellence. The image of a radical as one who insists on returning to sacrosanct traditions also threatens the status quo. And as you think about even so many of our current matters, there are those who are very critical of the current climate in which we are living as a departure from our roots, our better roots. We have all kinds of roots, as a departure from our better roots. And there are those who believe that, yes, while we have many better roots, there are also roots that need to be pulled up, and that's the role of the radical. And I think it's this whole question of discerning good roots and distorted roots is the work, our work. Some of the distorted roots in the Christian faith, for example, are ones that characterize enemies as other. And once you are other, you do not count. And it's the kind of thing that has led some people to decide that if you're not a Christian, you are then subject to whatever violence that can occur to you. It's like what a Christian leader said during the Crusades when they made an assault upon a town ruled by Muslims. And when it was noted that there are a lot of Christians in that town also, he said, well, let God sort them out. This understanding of otherness as being our enemies is also deeply rooted in language. And William May, the theologian William May, has said that in many cultures, the word for enemy is the same word that is used for stranger. And I think we can understand how so often strangers are perceived only as threats, and sometimes as threats to be eliminated or threats to be kept away from us because they are not just intimidating, but we in some way perceive them as failing our embrace, are meriting our embrace. Also, violence is another of those roots within religion that is worthy to be pulled up. And we have, of course, in our history, examples where violence is basically sanctioned, approved, advocated as the means by which to achieve the good. I liked the comment with Dorothy Day, who is now in the process of sainthood, when she said, nonviolence makes the world safe for conflict. And I think Dorothy Day is right. Seeing violence as the means by which beloved community comes about, I think fails the way beloved community comes about. In the same way, we have to be attentive to recognizing how there's so much in our tradition that we need to get back to take seriously what it means to pray for our enemies, which is in our roots. And there are all kinds of stories of pastors who have gotten into trouble trying to do that before a congregation where to pray for an enemy during a time of war was basically considered to be treasonous, so to be inconsiderate of those who were in the battle. The truth be told, often we do not know how to pray for enemies. We know how to pray about enemies, but to pray for enemies can be really at least confusing for us. To get back to our roots of caring for the poor, and to not have such a thing simply characterized as socialistic, to get back to the roots of taking seriously those who are incarcerated and what it means to be in relationship with them, and not simply to be in the process of shunning by leaving them off to some place that we never expect to visit and we really do not care to know about. To get back to the roots is vital to us, as well as the roots that we're to pull up. And so, in addition to pulling up roots and getting back to the roots, and this is where I'm wanting to conclude our time, is that it's also important for us to be involved in the activity of nurturing roots, nurturing. And here I want to focus on one of the main themes of Thurman's understanding of central disciplines, and that is the discipline of reconciliation. And Thurman speaks about this extensively in his book, Disciplines of the Spirit, reconciliation, which he often equates with love. He insists that everyone has the personal responsibility and opportunity to contribute to nurturing roots by establishing fellowship across racial, ethnic, and faith boundaries. We can do this. This is our calling. And the fundamental principle for addressing alienation in society, for addressing conflict in society, relates to reconciliation and our commitment to it. Because Thurman believes that hate begins in situations where there is no contact among people who are different from one another. And you will find this in his book, Jesus and the Disinherited, a book that Martin Luther King Jr. carried with him throughout the Montgomery boycott, and a book which was crucial to those involved in the civil rights movement in Nashville. They said there were two books that informed their work, one being the Bible, the second being Jesus and the Disinherited. It has not been out of publication since 1949 and is listed in one volume as one of the 30 outstanding books in classical mysticism. Thurman says that hate begins in persons and situations where there is no contact among people who are different. Think about that, no contact. Because with no contact, you can then relate to another only in an abstract way, but never out of an experience with the person. And when you only relate to people in an abstract way, you begin to often dehumanize them. So often in a negative sense, the extent to which they are understood to be strangers, therefore enemies, are less than. And this truly fails who we are called to be to one another. Even a positive stereotype can be perceiving someone in an abstract way. It would be like saying, all Asians are good at math, or all children from India are really good at spelling. Yes, that sounds positive, but it's also stripping people of their fuller humanity. And it can be an easy way to try and step outside of this sense of, just thinking negatively about people with whom I have no contact. But the crisis is in no contact. And he says, contact without fellowship leads to unsympathetic understanding. This is the next step. So we have contact people, but there's really no fellowship with them. It would be like being on a public bus, and you may have contact with people on the bus, but there's no fellowship. You may have contact with other youth on the bus who are loud, who are doing the kinds of things on a bus they're not supposed to be doing, that leads to all sorts of ill feelings about them, and the way in which they must be rude and crude, and you have wonders about their upbringing and do they care about other people. It's this kind of stereotyping that results from, yes, there is contact, but there's really no fellowship. And then he says, fellowship that is unsympathetic leads to hatred walking the earth. And here we see that alienation is not just a pre-crisis reality. Alienation is the crisis. It is the crisis. One of the most basic meanings of the word reconciliation is a place of meeting. And the challenge for all of us is to create such places, to participate in such places, to have such places to extend the invitation to others. I have been reticent to use the word reconciliation to suggest this is what we are aiming for, because for so many people, the word reconciliation has something of a sense of conclusion that, we are reconciled. I can understand it as a goal, but I think what might be most helpful to us is to think about what does it mean for us to be involved in the reconciling process. That there is a kind of joy, there's a kind of excitement, there is a kind of readiness that comes from being involved in the process, even when the experience of, quote, reconciliation has not occurred among us. And there is a blessing that comes to us from being involved in the process and staying involved in the process that comes to us, I think, as long as we are understanding that this is where God calls us to be. It's not just in a place where we're all declaring how we're happy to be together, but to be involved in the process with others. It's like that Latin American adage, we shall build the road as we walk it. We shall understand reconciliation as we are involved in doing it, in welcoming the stranger, in being a good guest, in extending hospitality as a host, understanding what it means to be with people in our vulnerability and not just with attitudes of control, understanding what it means to be involved in the reconciling process, even when we are not certain how this is going to turn out, even when we are dealing with persons who impose all kinds of motives on us, which are not our motives, but they're being imposed upon us. And we don't want to own what they're saying. And we wonder, should we be in? No, we stay in the process regardless, because this is where we are called to be. And to understand those emotions, those feelings that perhaps are intimidating for us, or which in some way would lead us to refuse to be involved, I think is vital to what it means to be involved in this reconciling process. So, where are such places of meeting in your life? And where are such places in Metro Atlanta? And how are the members of Epiphany and the church itself involved in such places of reconciliation? How are we involved with churches, synagogues, masjids, community centers, and civic organizations? And how are we involved at such levels of crossing the boundaries of our identity that we are able to have table fellowship with those? One of the most intimate ways in which people express connection is to be at table together eating. And that's universally true, being at table together, eating in public. I close with this. The cultivation of relationships, even friendships, it may occur quickly or may be a long time in coming. Relationships across boundaries of race and ethnicity and faith and disability and social standing, and with the incarcerated, not just persons in prison, but those who have been released and who are desiring caring relationships. They can be cultivated, they can be nurtured. They're all forms of storytelling, and they're all forms of rituals of grief that enable us to move forward. And I believe we can take seriously Thurman's steps of how hate can be overcome and not just allow hate to be walking the earth. What we have in all of this, what we have from Jesus, what we have from Thurman, what we have from this word about our own initiative and capacity to be in the reconciling process and to make this a different world, a world where justice is more pervasive and compassion is more pervasive, is to take seriously the invitation to come home to oneself, to recognize our true selves, as Thomas Merton would speak of it, our most authentic selves, rather than trying to be involved in transforming the world when perhaps we may fail to take seriously who we really are and how truly capable we are as God has called us to become who God has called us to be. Where do you go to meet persons beyond the borders of your identities? Where might you go? Who will you take with you? And how will you seek to discover such opportunities? Howard Thurman has said, if you want to get home, you have to give somebody a ride. And I think Thurman is right. And giving them a ride is not just for their benefit, it's our own benefit. I believe that the promise for us is accepting the privilege of such an opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. It's so good to be with you. We will move now to a time of question and answer. I'll be looking in the chat. You can raise your hand, but you can also go ahead and unmute yourself. So far, people have been pretty good at doing that well, and so we can also work within that model too.
I just want to say thank you. I've taken so many notes, but I'm grateful that this is being recorded so that I can go back and listen again. Thank you.
Can I speak?
Absolutely.
I grew up in the segregated South. Can anybody hear me? Oh, okay. I grew up in the segregated South, and I begged my family, my parents, to let me go up to college in New Jersey, which I did do. And then I thought, well, there were only 3 Black women in my class at Douglas College in 1956 or 7, whatever it was. I thought, well, I hadn't gone far enough. Well, then I went to Cornell and went to the School of Labor Relations. There were people from all over the world there, and it was just one of the happiest experiences I ever had, because there were all these people from a whole lot of places, and we all interacted. And I've never, okay, so then the rest of my life has been that I finally came back to the South because I felt like I was part of the solution, which meant that I taught for 26 years at Clark Atlanta University, historically Black college, which was great. I just loved all my experiences with my Black students. But I've now been retired for 20 years, and I realized that a lot of these wonderful ways in which I've reacted with people, a lot of them have dried up. You know, those live in a practically all white neighborhood. But I have made an effort to have someone living in our house. Number one, about 5 years ago, a Persian who then had his wife with him, who was American, but she lived everywhere. And then we had a young woman living with us with her daughter, who are Muslims. And we now have a young Black woman living with us. And she's just a good American, black gal, but I don't have the variety that I have had in other places and times. So I feel like my husband and I are both getting older, but we love interacting with people. We met somebody on the subway just last week coming home from Decatur back to Inman Park. And I had the greatest conversation with this young black man sitting there on the bench waiting for the train. And I just mourn not having that kind of thing enough. And that is what I have to say.
Thank you.
Thank you for being the catalyst for these feelings coming up. You and Howard Thurman, who I had known about.
And I would just say that cultivating relationships and attending to relationships are a lifelong matter. It's never, it's not as if out of a commitment or out of a relationship it's done. That friendships require so much of us. And if we go too long over a period of time without attending to them, we begin to talk about friendships that we had, but not friendships that are being sustained. And, it can happen with a friendship in a marriage relationship. If one begins to fail to be attentive to what is important in the cultivation of such a relationship. But how we give ourselves to this, I think, is not just a response for us in terms of obligation. I think it's blessing. It's fulfillment. It's joy. It will have its moments of disappointments. It's like Jesus coming to the Last Supper and having to say a word about, there's a betrayer in the room. And having to say later, all of you will deny me at some point in time, but still I am choosing to be with you.
The church has a racial justice class that I'm a part of. And I think one of the things what's been talked about is how we struggle to be in relationship with others, but not just doing charity work. Right. And that's not really being in relation. Well, I don't want to say it's not being in relation. It's not what we hope to achieve, but it's a struggle figuring that out.
I think the word that I have found most helpful personally about the kind of loving care that we seek to extend to others is the word solidarity. When am I seeking to be really in solidarity with people and not just in some way attending to a need, as important as attending to a need can be? And one way in which to understand solidarity is, how do I feel and live in such a way that what they are going through is in some way felt so deeply by me, I am going through it. And there's an uneasiness in my life that only gets met. I'm not saying solved or resolved, but only gets met when I'm attentive in ways that are caring. It's like Eugene Debs said, while there's a lower class, I am of it. While there's a criminal element, I am in it. While there's a person in jail, I am not free. The sense in which my whole sense of self doesn't doesn't fall prey to being under the oppression of oppression and therefore not having times of celebration and joy. No, it is that, but I will not let my heart grow cold. I will not have a hardening of the heart, so that when I am distributing food, I'm not just filling an empty belly, I am relating to someone. And I think one of the most difficult tasks in Christian charity is to care for people, is to relate to others, not just in terms of their need, but in terms of who they are. And my experience has been, and I think the experience of many, is that it's not simply a way of caring for another. There's something personally that gets spoken to that becomes a gift to me, that gets addressed to me and something profoundly in me that goes far beyond any kind of generosity I might have had in time and resources.
Can see the wheels turning in many of our heads, but are there any other questions or thoughts to share with the group this morning?
You know,
I
it's
have a question. Oh, was somebody else?
Thank you, Alex. Go for it.
Go ahead, Alex.
I see Alex in
Thanks.
the middle of my screen. It's you.
Yeah, well, and the cat too. Dr. Smith, thank you so much for being here today. This has been absolutely incredible. For those of us who are wanting to do a deeper dive into Howard Thurman, do you have a sort of reading list that you might recommend? I mean, I think he was prolific, and people, including yourself, have written about him. So, like, where do I start?
I think it's helpful to see this documentary because it provides an overview. I think in terms of reading about Thurman, Jesus and the Disinherited is a seminal text, perhaps his best known. There is the Thurman autobiography, With Head and Heart, where you get to hear his interpretation of the sweep of his life in a way that's helpful. At the end, just this month, a new biography on Thurman has come out. It's over 500 pages by Peter Eisenstadt. It's entitled Against the Hounds of Hell, it's a masterpiece. I read the manuscript as Peter was writing it, and it's affordable for over 500 pages at only $35. But Thurman has also written a lot of meditations. The Mood of Christmas is a book that a lot of congregations will be using around the season of Advent, and there's some beautiful meditations in that. Thurman's favorite meditation book for him personally is one entitled The Inward Journey. I have edited a book on Thurman that brings together about 14 of his works. It's published by Arbus Press. It's entitled Essential Writings, Howard Thurman. And they are organized thematically in a way that I think addresses some of the major themes in Thurman's writing. And each chapter, I've written an introduction to that. So I think those are really helpful beginnings, as well as his book that I mentioned earlier, Disciplines of the Spirit, where he talks about 5 essential disciplines that I think are worthy of us. And I especially hone in on the disciplines of suffering, as well as the discipline of growth, which I think are some of the more difficult disciplines for us to embrace as practices, not just suffering as something that happens to us, but what does it mean to choose suffering as essential to Christian identity? I think Thurman is really important and helpful with that.
Alex might be starting a book group soon, so stay tuned.
Thank you so much for being with us today. It's been so incredibly rich. And let me add to the person who said that I'm going to go back and listen to all of this again, because there was so much meat on the bone of everything that you said. It seems to me that we are just either habitually or intentionally stuck in our own pods of people who are like us. And in order for that to really change, you have to do something intentional. And there are some really interesting sort of grassroots oriented programs. There's a lot of them, actually. There's not just one. Which the purpose of which is drawing people of different views together to share a meal. Usually that's what it is. And I wish I could think of the names of some of these programs. You could Google it. But there are these programs where people in communities get together across differences to share a meal. That's been an encouraging thing to see, that kind of thing popping up in all kinds of places. But thank you so much for being our guest today. It's just been remarkable.
Thank you. And those opportunities some of those opportunities are very much involved in Atlanta. I know there's one now occurring around interfaith matters, how to be involved with persons of other faith traditions in terms of cultivating friendship across these boundaries. Heidi Tauscher, a former student of mine, has been working with a local organization in this kind of practice. But I think you're absolutely right that we can become, the way in which our lives are lived within our own sort of identity boundaries are often structured by us. They're structured by our families of birth. They're structured by the communities in which we live. They're structured by the places we choose to go. They're structured by work. They get structured by our faith communities. And it's really important for us to be thinking about both personal and collective initiatives we can take to move beyond those boundaries. And it may be that that I am best able to transcend a boundary with a companion than just going by myself, that to have someone with me, not just in terms of getting to the experience, but to be a conversation partner after the experience, and how we are able to then take seriously this way in which intimacy serves us in moving forward together. And I think it's difficult to think of a more transformative opportunity for us to really understand loving our neighbors, not just the neighbors we know by name and who have some proximity, but I think in the fullest meaning of what Jesus was calling us to do and what the Hebrew scriptures are calling us to do. Thank you.
Well, I have to get going to the second service, but I did want to say thank you again, Dr. Smith, for your time with us. Thank you again for reminding us about the radical Jesus, and thank you for bringing to us the beauty of your own life that has lived through the words of Thurman's teaching and life. We just thank you so much for being with here. Paul and Aaron are available for just a few minutes if you all want to continue conversing. But otherwise, I hope that you will tune in again with us next week as we continue the conversation.
Thank you.
Blessings.
Blessings.
Any other final questions or burning concerns?
Really appreciate the recommendations for reading, and I think this will definitely inspire a lot more study and incorporating it into our racial justice discussions as well. So thank you, Dr. Smith.
Thank you.
I like Paul.
Yeah.
It's Julie in Panama City. I like the use of this, the rooting out of. That's kind of been my work as in my spiritual work is rooting out within myself the bias, the metaphors I use, the impact of language, and particularly privilege. Rooting out that privilege, and for transformation, in my life, there is a point at which I have hit a boundary of transformation, because it's living on top of a lot of that assumption, the unknowing that I live with about those things that come from family, and using Jesus, hearing Jesus say, it's not hating your mother and father. It's to me, it was looking at what they taught without me questioning it. So rooting is a powerful place for me. Thank you for that.
Mm.
Anyone else? Thank you, Dr. Smith, so much. This has been just so enriching, and we thank you for your time today. It's been just beautiful, and wish you the best in your ministry. And I guess we'll call it.
Thank you so
everyone.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care of yourselves. Bye now.
Bye.